So I'm really, really glad that you've joined me today, Ollie. And thank you very, very much for agreeing to talk to me. Obviously, I'm on this Korean course that I'm studying now online for the whole year. And I started it all out with a course that you're fairly familiar with,
It
which
rings a bell.
the Michel Thomas Method. And obviously, hearing your dulcet tones on the course was a nice, familiar thing for me. And I thought you came across really well, actually. I know you joke saying, "Oh, you've got to listen to me for 10 hours."
Yeah.
I thought it was quite nice to hear your voice. I just sort of I wanted to, having looked at your documentary about making it, which I've already linked to in my blog, and I'll pop a link in as well here. Just wanted to know, now it's 2 years later, what stayed? What are your impressions now?
Yeah. Well, first of all, great to talk to you. Thanks for the invitation. And it's nice to talk about this because it's one of those experiences which is very, very intense, because the recording process is 4.5 days of, like, you know full on recording. So however long you take to go through the course, we did in, like, basically 4 days, 4 and a bit days. So it's very intense, and there's a lot to remember. But there's something about the intensity of that experience that makes it stick. And I think that kind of goes for language learning as a whole. The more you intensely do something, the longer things tend to stick. And for me, the I think above, you can drill down into any particular area that you like, but the main thing that was evident to me when we were recording the course, and still is 2 years later, just over 2 years later, is the grammar.
Mm,
Because, I mean, Michel Thomas is, at least the Korean version that we did, it's all centered around sentence structures and basic grammar, and also some not so basic grammar as well. There's, it's a beginner course, but there's a fair amount of more complex stuff in there as well. And so much of the course itself is spent using the grammar structures that you learn to just say things in different ways. Swapping out vocabulary, um, having different conversations, and of course, not everything that we recorded made it into the final edit, right? So the stuff that you heard, there's probably at least 50% that didn't make it through. So we had loads and loads of practice going over and over and over these different grammar structures, and that was the main thing that stuck for me, and I still remember a lot of it, now, a long time afterwards.
well, I'm not going to test you, don't worry. But I had a similar experience when I did the Japanese course, that I found that some of the structures that, to be honest, even later on now with Korean, I've been studying Korean on a daily basis with Talk to Me in Korean, and really it's taken up till about now, which is about 20 days in. Um, I've still not met all of the structures that I met in the Michel Thomas Method
Yeah.
course, which is interesting because you think that you're going to just do these, what you did 4 days, right, of recording, and you think, oh, you'd probably meet them within a week or 2 weeks, but actually 3 weeks into my study, still not come across everything that we did uh,
Yeah.
on the Michel Thomas Method.
Yeah, that doesn't surprise me, because um, I think it's difficult to draw parallels between a language like Korean um, and European languages that have the CEFR, but there are certainly some B1, strong intermediate level structures that are taught in the Michel Thomas course. So you're saying things like, because I met John yesterday, I went to this place and did this kind of thing. So you're compounding a lot of different things together, and that's really the main feature of the Michel Thomas course. I mean, you're not taking Michel Thomas to learn thousands of vocabulary words.
Mhm.
You're taking it to get a really strong working knowledge of the language, to the point where you kind of have an overview, you have a bird's eye view of a lot of the main sort of semantic possibilities and avenues that you can take through the language, and then the kind of where that by the time you get to the end of the course, where that ends, you kind of pick up at a point where you've got this roadmap now, and you just kind of got to fill it in with with the new vocabulary that you have to learn. So if you were going to take a regular structural pathway through the language, then I remember saying to Keris, who was my co student on the course, that I wouldn't surprise me if a lot of the things that we took about 2 years to encounter on a regular course. So yeah, they really do. You cover a lot of fairly advanced stuff.
Yeah, it kind of really does show you that there is a lot that's possible in a short period of time. Like you say, and I think the teachers said as well during your documentary, that you clearly cannot cover the amount of grammar, the amount of vocabulary that you'd meet it sort of when we talk about these A1, A2, B1, B2 type levels. I mean, really, the vocabulary is just, it widens, doesn't it? You sort of start with this sort of limited amount of vocabulary, and then it really goes out quite broad to when you get to the really high levels in a language, and that's what takes time to learn. I mean,
that and the kind of endless finessing of more complex grammar, which kind of at the high level can be just as difficult. But it is an interesting way to look at a language. I remember encountering this statistic when I first did my English language teaching training years ago. And our tutor told us something like, meaning in a language is 5% grammar and 95% vocabulary. And you kind of take that and you think, that's interesting. But actually, when you take a course like Michel Thomas course, you realize that actually I'd ask you how you feel about this, but imagine that you had all of the vocabulary you needed in Korean.
Mm-hmm.
I would have thought that the grammar that you learn in Michel Thomas is kind of enough for quite some time.
Mm-hmm.
For any kind of regular daily communicative purpose.
Yeah, absolutely. And it gives you that confidence. And I know that when I've come across some of the structures I've started coming across now in just my general study of Korean, where vocabulary and sort of grammatical structures are more equally balanced, I guess, because they've got the luxury of time. You're doing it at your own pace. You know, this is a 10-month thing in terms of the levels, because they have a lesson a day on Talk to Me in Korean. And I think it's 30 to 31 per month or per level. So it's roughly a month per level, and there are 10 levels. So I'm guessing it will run over into the 11th month, because clearly there are different numbers of days in each month, and we've got February. So what I'm finding though is that when I get to a lesson where the focus is a grammatical point, like I had, the focus being I want to do something, and that was one of the structures that you learn. I want to do, or I want to say, I want to go, I want to speak, I want to, and you would always have, I want to go to London tomorrow. How do you say that in Korean? Olly, how would you say, I want to go to London tomorrow? And you would then say it. And I find that when I get to that point on those lessons, I'm so confident, because I did it with the Michel Thomas method, that now it's almost like a breeze just going through that lesson. I just write the thing down. I don't even feel like I need to test myself, because it's just in my head. Like you say, it just stays there, right?
Yeah, and it's just that endless repetition, and it's just an interesting approach, isn't it? The fact that you have this endless repetition, and there's a certain discipline there from a pedagogical perspective. There's a certain discipline of sticking with this focus on sentence structure and grammar, and not getting too sidetracked by vocabulary. And that's, from a teaching perspective, that's not actually easy to do, because there are so many things you can teach. And I think what's when I, as a teacher myself and being the student on the Michel Thomas course, what was very apparent is the huge amount of work that had gone in to the preparation of the syllabus, and that work is kind of is evident by the absence of lots of things that are not taught. And I think when it comes to grammar, I get the impression that, having having talked to Derek, who was one of the course tutors, at length, I know that they spend a huge amount of time deciding what not to teach. And when it comes to the grammar, I think there probably is an element of what's the name of that, the effect where you think you're better than you are? Is it the Zeigarnik effect? Dunning-Kruger effect. I always get those two mixed up. I think there is probably an element of that, in the sense that there are definitely exceptions and irregular stuff that you don't even encounter, that it's not even mentioned in the course, for a very good reason, right? To keep you focused on the kind of purity of the thing you're trying to express. So there's a lot that's omitted, for sure. But then again, you could say, well, does it really matter? It's like, what's the point of trying to master all those nuances at that level anyway? And I think, I imagine we both agree that it's not useful, and it would be better to pick that up from context, from input over time.
Well, if you think about English and how children learn English, you know, you and I both got English first language children, right? And I remember, you know, you'd hear children, not just our own children, but you'd hear children generally, their friends, and they'll say things like, I seed him, or I speaked to him, or
I put it in the drawer.
I put it in the drawer. Exactly.
Mm.
They overgeneralize a rule, but it doesn't hamper understanding. And I'm sure that in pretty much every language around the world, children will do the same thing. So speakers of the language are quite used to these overgeneralizations of a basic rule in a language. And so they can adjust and compensate for that to get the meaning. So focusing on the general rules, I think, makes sense. And like you say, then you're equipped with this scaffolding to be able to say so many different things in so many different contexts. And it just gives you this confidence to be able to speak. And that really is important, you know, having that confidence.
Well, especially with languages like Korean, and I think you could say the same for Chinese and Japanese as well. From a Western perspective, they're difficult languages. So if you do try to if you do have this approach of trying to learn every little detail as you go, you know, you very quickly reach a state of overwhelm. And one of the big things that a kind of regular language learner will, or an experienced language learner will run up against, just this feeling of overwhelm, of having so much to learn. I've got to learn the alphabet, and then I've got to learn these 16 different honorifics or whatever it is. And you can quite quickly be overwhelmed by the entire project if you insist on learning and memorizing and perfecting everything as you go. So I think there's a lot to be said for things that just get you up and running out the door using the language, in much the same way that that people often, you know, there are some people, their favorite language learning method is just going to go out into the street and just start talking with strangers until they get it, and they just kind of, it's the Tarzan approach. I mean, it's clearly not the most efficient way of learning a language, but it has this really important advantage of getting you over the fear barrier and getting you using the language at an early stage. And that can sometimes make the difference between a successful project and not.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, and vocab you can kind of plug in as you go and when you need it. And I think that's the key, is knowing what you need to know for when you need to know it. And this is the thing that I notice with a lot of learners. They focus a lot, especially if they sort of get onto a topic, and let's say they pick, or in class even, they have a topic like occupations. And all of a sudden their minds are going crazy with, and how do you say architect? And how do you say historian? And how do you say librarian? And how do you say, and they've got this list of professions. Like, keep it simple in the beginning. Just stick with the ones that are most relevant to you. You know, what do you do? What does your partner do? What do your parents do? You know, what does your best friend do? Because they're the people you're likely to be talking about in any given context. And if you come across somebody who has a different occupation, learn it then, because you can get carried away, and all of a sudden you've got reams and reams of vocabulary that all basically just scream at you on a constant daily basis. You haven't learned me yet. You haven't learned me. You haven't learned me yet. You failed, and that's all they do, because you can't possibly do it. You're not a computer. Unless you use a memory technique, I don't know. And then it's still just lists that you have in your head, I guess.
Right. Yeah. Do you feel like you've got a sense yet of the size of the task ahead of you, because I'm sure you're aware that a language like Korean is extremely vast, profound language with endless rabbit holes and things to go down. Have you got a sense of that yet, or are you just kind of content going through the structured lessons at this stage?
I'm trying not to focus on Everest and trying to focus on base camp. I think that focusing on the summit the whole time and sort of the peak of speaking Korean as a non-native speaker, as a second language learner, isn't helpful. It really isn't helpful. All it can do is make you feel dejected and far away from an end goal or something like. I mean, I don't even focus on what I'm going to be doing in on the 10th level of this Talk to Me in Korean course that I'm on now. I'm literally just going day by day, focusing on getting at the end to the end of month one, and then looking back and seeing what I've done. And probably I'm going to need to revise some of what I've done. So I'm going to get to that stage, see where I'm up to. And at the moment, I mean, I've got this book and I write. So this is, say, 19 days worth of Korean. And I'm just writing every day.
Yeah.
And it's already fairly substantial, I'd say.
Yeah.
19 days of Korean. There's a lot of vocab.
Notebooks tend to do that to you, don't they? They just fill up before you know it.
I know, and I just think, well, this is me taking it easy with Korean, right?
Yeah.
Because this isn't me being crazy with it. This is 15, 20 minutes a day of a podcast with notes. And I'm probably filling maximum 1 page of a notebook.
And what is your goal? What's your why for Korean?
My why is my daughter wanted to learn Korean and asked me if I'd learn it with her.
Oh wow, that's awesome.
And that's the why. It's not my usual why.
No.
Got to be honest. It's not my usual why, and it did take me a bit of time to get my head around and to come up with strategies and ways and means of actually dealing with a language that I hadn't really considered learning in any seriousness at this stage of my life. I went to Korea on the way to Japan for the conference and spent a couple of days there, met with some friends, went to a few language meetups, basically to talk about the conference that was going to happen in Japan because it's so close by, and build a bit of interest and to meet with people. And it was great. And I got a few friends out there, but I didn't really know any Korean. And I learned maybe a couple of words max, like hello and thank you. I probably learned that was it. And didn't really touch it at all. And then living in the Balkans, you never hear Korean. It's not a language we come across. There's no sort of Korean community. There's definitely no Korean restaurants. I've met one Korean lady who's married to a local, but she speaks really good English and she speaks Macedonian.
Right. I guess it's nice though, if you're learning with your daughter, then you only really just need to be one step ahead, don't you? And then you can help guide the process.
What I'm trying to do is not sort of hold her to what she wanted to do. And I decided it was a good idea for me to go through the process and record it generally for people out there learning a new language that they're not familiar with. It seemed like a really golden opportunity to just take a year to study a language that I've never been involved with. Now, if my daughter carries on with it, if she doesn't, if she stops, if she starts, if she gets to the end of her goals or she doesn't, there's no judgment, no problem at all. She's 13. She wants to be familiar with Korean. Wherever she gets, it's a success because she's learned about the language and she's learned about the country, the people, and she's doing it for her own reasons. So I'm not going to hold her accountable, or definitely not going to make any of her goals known to anybody out there, because I wouldn't want that for her. I'm very much pressure on that.
Is she into K-pop and K-drama?
No.
Right.
Interestingly.
Yeah. Because you'd be in trouble if she was, because then she'd just be binging on that stuff and she'd be fluent in a few weeks. Because this happens so often with Asian languages. You get teenagers who just discover anime or Korean music or something like that, and then they just go crazy in a good way and spend hours and hours a day consuming it. And just by sheer volume of content, they can be like very fluent in the language, like just from input in the space of a few years. So I was wondering whether that was on the cards.
Well, I've
But
met a few people like that with Japanese,
yeah, me
particularly,
too.
and also with Korean, but Japanese, I've met quite a few. And then they say, well, Japanese is so easy. I'm like, well, it is easy if all you're doing is taking in Japanese media and
Having fun and stuff that you love. Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
And no, with her, the interest came because she likes architecture and interior design, and she's interested in all those kinds of things. So she watches lots of things like that about that on YouTube. And she found this channel and she just said, Dad, I really, really like this channel and I'd love to learn the language. It sounds really cool. Not quite sure what it is. Will you listen to it? And I was like hoping it was going to be Japanese or Chinese, a language, because I know it's Asian, but I don't know which one exactly. And I was hoping for one that I'd studied before, and then I heard it, and I was like, oh, it's Korean. I was like, oh dear, here we go. And then she said, I'd love to learn it with you. I was like, okay. So what I do is I just carry on with the study I've got. I picked Talk to Me in Korean because it has daily goals that you can give to your child, that you say, okay, you do this. There's a quiz at the end of each lesson. There's a little video that you can watch.
That's nice.
It's a really well-structured site in terms of teaches you basic stuff, shows you a video with the type of vocabulary and sentence structure that you need, and then it quizzes you on it. Super easy. So I paid for the premium version for her to be able to get the certificate at the end of each level as an extra incentive, which I think is good for school kids. But I try not to pressure and sort of say too much. I do check every now and again, have you done your Korean? And just to see where she's up to with it. But I'll let her do that. I think it's important for children to also feel that awareness and the ownership of their own studies as well.
Especially if they've got that root level of motivation, which she clearly has. Yeah.
So we'll see how she gets on. I definitely am carrying this on and doing it for the year. I've even found an italki teacher now, and I've had a couple of lessons.
Okay, how'd it go?
And it's good. I mean, it's going well so far. We'll see. I think there are hurdles that you get to in any language learning, right? You know this as well as I do, and you feel like you're making huge strides in the beginning, and then there are kind of a couple of months in, you've learned some of the basic structures, and things start to get a bit more serious.
Yeah. So that's what I was getting at earlier with the question about whether you got to that point yet, where it's like you open a door and you realize, oh, hang on, I've just been in the hallway this entire time, and the rest of the house is through here. Is she doing Michel Thomas as well, or is she just doing her own stuff?
So she listened to the first lesson of Michel Thomas with me, and
she heard the guy on there, and she thought, no.
Oh, she knows exactly. So I can't listen to him, but it's very difficult to listen to that with somebody. I think you need to do it on your own.
Mm-hmm.
I think for her at the moment, it's on my iPad, so it's quite difficult to just sort of give her my iPad when I need it for other things. I may well give it to her again and try that again. I'll see how she gets on. It just sometimes feels, I think, for children that age, depending on how their brains are and how you're wired, it can feel like quite a lot to sit down and just listen for hours and hours.
Yeah.
He's more, so I'll try and probably go back and revisit and say, do it in bite-sized chunks.
Well, it's interesting because that Michel Thomas documentary, is it The Language Master, the BBC one? That was him in a school. How old were those kids? They were a bit older, maybe like 15, 16, maybe.
A bit older. A
bit different, yeah.
They did it in a weekend, and they had the concentration, and maybe it's being in a room, and
doing it live.
Yeah, exactly. A bit different than if you're just listening to it and you've got like life going on around you in your normal environment. It can be a bit more distracting, I guess. And she's also got other work to do as well. Like she's got assignments, she has piano lessons, she has all these other things. So, and she wants to relax as well. So sort of trying to get her to sit down, maybe, unless I just say this amount of time and these amount of lessons and actually structure it, then maybe I can do that. I think as an adult, it's easier to do that yourself.
Yeah.
For younger children, younger learners, sometimes they need a bit more guidance, which is why I found the talk to me in Korean quite good because it's a 15-20 minute manageable segment that you just do.
And is that intended for kids, or is it?
Everyone.
Oh yeah.
Anyone and everyone. I looked at a lot of different courses before I picked it, and yeah, I mean, there are children who will take really well to certain courses that we use as adults, but I think when it comes to sort of a structure that children often crave at school, my daughter likes to know I have to do this at this time, then I finish it, and then I move on to the next thing.
Yeah.
And that's just the way she works. That's the way her mind works. And so this fits that paradigm very, very well.
Yeah.
It's super obvious to her what she needs to do and when.
Sure.
But yeah, I mean, I encourage you to have a look if you fancy having a look after doing the Michel Thomas method.
Yeah.
It's pretty cool seeing how you write some of those structures. That's one of the things I had no idea how I'd write some of the things I heard, even though I'd learned the alphabet at the same time as doing the Michel Thomas course.
Yeah.
I didn't know how I'd write some of the things, and watching how you write it, the isoyo and opsoyo and all this kind of stuff. It was so strange because you're like, oh, that's now that makes more sense, or now that's confused me a bit more.
Yeah, well, that's interesting because one of the sort of cornerstones of the Michel Thomas method is that you're not allowed to take any notes. There's no note taking, there's no revision, there's no homework. So we were sitting there, even though we had to remember this stuff on an accelerated timetable, like live in the studio, and get it right as much as possible. We still didn't take notes, and we were under strict instructions in the evening when we left, like, don't review this stuff, just go home and chill out. And the idea being that your brain can take stuff in very naturally. I don't know, it's that's the method. And it's did you take notes when you were listening, or did you do it? Were you a purist when you were using the recordings? I'm curious.
So
didn't you?
I don't want to lie too much, but so when I did the Japanese,
well, you know how you learn. That's the thing. I mean, you should take and adapt stuff when you've got
I do
level
like
of experience.
To write down. Okay, so this is what I did in the beginning. I also did this knowing that I was going to be documenting what I was doing, right? And one of the things I wanted to do was to make a video using everything I'd had from the Michel Thomas Method course in Korean. That was one of the things that I was planning on doing. In the end, so I started taking notes so that I basically knew what kinds of things I could say, not to take notes to learn the language in the way that I was supposed to learn it. It was more just to take notes on the kinds of vocabulary that I come across so that I could remember to say them, if you get what I mean.
Yeah.
And to remember to say the certain patterns to really fully show what you learn. And then as I went through, I got about halfway through, and it was just not something I'd thought, and do you know what? This is a waste of time. And I just scrapped my notes completely and carried on. And I'm glad I did, because I don't know, after watching your documentary, and I think you can just discuss what you learned from it in English in a quite adequate way. And I think that's fine, actually. I don't think there needs to be a demonstration. And the reason I had that idea of a demonstration in my head was I did a Pimsleur challenge years ago in Korean, not in Korean, in Hungarian, sorry. I did this Pimsleur challenge in Hungarian after 1 month. And then I made a video using the Hungarian that I learned during the challenge. And people did find it interesting that what you could say after doing Pimsleur for a month. And I kind of had that in mind, but then I thought, do you know what? No, I really don't need to do this for Korean. And
I certainly understand the need to, if you're planning on documenting something. I've done a few of these myself, and you need stuff written down, because otherwise you just, you've got to decide what you're going to make a video about and stuff like that. But I guess it's an interesting question. Like, with a method like Michel Thomas, if, given that it does front load all the grammar in the course, or rather in the sense that the course front loads all the grammar in the learning process, then you do kind of have that dilemma. Is okay, if you start to try to write everything down, is this not kind of defeating the object?
Yeah.
You know, the object being to just to get a general sense of the grammar. And you know, as soon as you start kind of trying to study it or write it down or take notes, you're kind of interfering with that intention, aren't you? So I don't know, because I haven't been a student, a Michel Thomas student from a recording. I've only done it live, so I'm not sure. I think certainly doing it live, the intensity is such that, I mean, you haven't got time to write stuff down anyway, because the recordings are just full days. But also the amount of sheer repetition does the job for you. So you everything that we were saying by the end of the recording, you know, we had learnt and memorized during those 4 days, and it's just the you know, the amount of repetition that gets you there, you know.
Yeah, I agree, and I think my advice to anybody listening to this, thinking, "Oh, it would have been good to see that Korean, and sort of why didn't you carry on taking notes?" I'll say this: it hampered my learning with Michel Thomas when I started taking notes, and that's why I stopped doing it and I went to the way it was prescribed to do. And actually, I found I benefited way more not taking notes, even though it was, you know, with good intentions and not meant for the learning process.
Yeah.
It hampered the learning process, and it kind of put me back a little bit, because I kept stopping and starting things because I was like writing it down, you know.
Well, exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
It's not a great way of doing it. In fact, it's better to just enjoy the course as it
Yeah,
is.
because it's fairly short, isn't it? I mean, it's not the longest course in the world.
No, it's 10 hours.
Mm.
You know, and it's not. I mean, I think you did. I think I heard during the documentary recording, was it 16 hours of recording that was then taken down to 10 or something like that?
At least, yeah. I mean, I think it's I'd have to check with Helen, but yeah, it's a huge amount that's cut out, because we also have screw ups in the recording as well. So like, you know, Derek will be introducing a new lesson and realizing, okay, hang on, I've just introed lesson 15, but I should be doing 13, and you know, there's a lot of outtakes, and you also don't get the bits where me and Keris are just like a head in our hands, like heads exploding, saying like, okay, no, that's it, I need a break, I can't take any more. So you don't get any of that. But yeah, no, it's tons of fun. I'd do it again.
I mean, it sounded like a lot of fun when you were doing it, and you know, Keris's reaction actually was, you know, really, really positive. I mean,
Yeah.
she was talking about doing university courses and all this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Like, wow. You know, feeling that energized. I think that's one of the things with the Michel Thomas method. Actually, you come out of it feeling energized. Maybe there is a bit of the Dunning-Kruger effect that you know you talked about, that you sort of feel more confident than you are, because obviously in reality you don't have the vocabulary yet, but it does give you that good foundation. And I think calling it a foundation met course is actually quite good, because that's exactly what it does. It is a foundation in the language, right? um, I suppose we all come across learners who sort of run at a language. They always charge at a language, and you do it for like a month or even less sometimes, and then they think they've covered so much. And like you say, you open the door and start going out into the world, and then you realize there's not just a world out there, there's a universe.
Yeah.
When it comes to the language, and it's
Yeah.
like, oh, okay.
Yeah. Time to eat a bit of humble pie.
Well, I mean, I've been through that experience so many times.
Oh yeah. I know.
And you feel so confident. And I mean, I'm going through it still with, you know, with languages like Greek and Turkish and Albanian. I sort of, these are three languages that I use fairly regularly normally, when there's no pandemic around. And I'm functional in them, right? I can do quite a lot of stuff. I can watch Albanian, for example. I can watch the news in Albanian. It's no biggie. Turkish, I can watch the news to a fairly good degree and get it. The Greek, oddly, the news I found a little bit tougher to grasp. But trying to break through those sort of the intermediate levels and really advance in the language, it just takes so long, because you've got so much vocabulary and so many topics to cover, that it just requires a lot of time. And I think you start seeing, as you say, sort of the nice finesses of the language that just take almost a lifetime to learn. And don't know about you, but even in English, I still learn things.
Well, yeah, of course. Yeah, and you catch yourself making mistakes, and you words. One of the things I find most frustrating is words that I know a word I want to say, but I just can't get it. And that's just a question of practice, isn't it? And how often you talk like that. No, but yeah, there's no doubt that a language like Korean, you know, if you're taking it on as your life's work, it's a 10-year project minimum to learn it to. If you aspire to a native like level or a C2 level, that kind of level, it's a 10-year project. And the reality is most of us never need to get to that level, not even close. But it does kind of put things into perspective a bit, with and then that's what's interesting about these, comparing one beginner course to the next. Like ultimately, they've all got their pros and cons, but you're only just beginning to scratch the surface, whichever way you look at it.
Absolutely. No, it's true. And when you were saying that 10-year mark, that was the kind of the amount of time that I think Professor Alexander Arguelles, talked about as well in one of his lectures. He spent that long in Korea and studied it a lot.
Yeah.
He said that's when, after the 10-year sort of mark, that's when he felt pretty comfortable in Korea. And I was like, oh, wow, okay.
Well, I remember Vlad at the Polyglot gathering some years back, said, I think he said something. I don't know if I saw him say this or if someone told me he said this, but it wouldn't surprise me either way. So Vlad, translates Chinese, said that he only felt like he was starting to really know the language after 10 years.
Yeah.
And
yeah. I mean, Vlad Skulteti is just a brilliant language learner. And I mean, he did his degree in Chinese in Prague, right? And then it was after he lived in Taiwan for, was it 5 years or something? And I remember him saying words to that effect as well. It just, you get there and then you almost do your degree and then the learning begins when you arrive. It's kind of, sounds scary. And I think when people like Vlad and like Alexander Arguelles say things like that,
you pay attention, right?
Well, pay attention, but also to not feel too discouraged, because to sort of give context, I mean, Alexander Arguelles has written books about the Korean language. Okay, so realistically, as a learner, do you really need to be at the point where you're writing books on the Korean language? Probably not.
Sure.
And Vlad, as you say, interpreter, translator, uses the language at a very, very high level. Again, do you really need to do that? Probably not. And if you think, those kinds of levels are sort of way further ahead than sort of the B1, B2 type level that you need to start studying in the language, to be able to follow most conversations and be able to take part in quite a lot of life in the country. And I think if we have those kinds of goals and think, okay, well, that's actually more realistic, and it's not going to be sort of a 25-year stretch for us to get anywhere near it. It's just helps to make you feel a bit more.
And the opposite is actually true for the vast majority of people. I mean, it's interesting to have this perspective of what really learning a language encompasses. But for most people who just want, I mean, I always have this the pub test, right? Can I sit with you in a pub and enjoy the conversation? If I sit and chat with someone in the bar, is he going to get up and leave, or is he going to sit and enjoy the, like, that's that for me? This is kind of the barometer for me personally of why I learn a language. Like, can I use it to that level? And that's eminently achievable. For anybody, certainly within often within a year, certainly within a couple of years, regardless of the language. So and Korean, I think, is no exception. So I look forward to our next meetup in Seoul, and we'll go for some barbecue meat and knock back a few bottles of the good stuff.
You can have some kimchi.
I love kimchi.
Do you?
Yeah, I love Korean food. When I went to Seoul, it was the barbecue ribs. Not sure. I'd have those. So I'm not even really eating meat these days so much.
You're doing a very good job of pretending to, though.
But I would eat those ribs in a flash. Yeah.
I mean, Korean food is amazing. I had a lot of Korean food while I was there and really enjoyed it. And yeah, absolutely, it'd be great to sort of to sort of loop back in a bit and sort of talk about what it's been like with this. And yeah, we can enjoy some time in Seoul. That would be very nice. Yeah,
So
when things are back to normal with travel.
yeah, mark that down as a plan for 2022 or something.
Thank you so much for joining me, Ollie. And
pleasure.
Yeah, if people want to reach you, we'll pop some links down. Anything else exciting coming out that we should be aware of?
Wow, what a question. Loads of things. We've got loads of new books on the way, short story books, things like that. Series of non-fiction books and things. We've got new courses in Korean, as it happens. And a bunch of stuff like that. But yeah, if anyone wants to find out more about that, then follow some of the links down below, and you can see that.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Ollie. And
thanks for the invitation, and it's good to talk, and it's good to see that that our Michel Thomas recording is being put to good use.
Yes, absolutely. No, thank you, and stay safe and take care.
Yeah, take care, man.
Bye-bye.